Nestled in the grassy hills of the western San Joaquin Valley near historic Pacheco Pass, San Luis Reservoir State Recreation Area is noted for boating, board sailing, camping, and picnicking. But it's anglers who find the unit's 3 lakes most inviting.
It does seem a bit of a caricature, doesn't it? And in the spring, it certainly is lovely and green for, maybe 3 months out of the year. But the rest of the year, San Joaquin Valley is a semi-arid desert. And so those hills dry out, that grass turns golden. Anyone who's traveled, across Highway 152 or up and down Interstate 5 has seen that. And so it's an interesting image in that, I think we all, we enjoy the greenness of nature, but that's not the way it is everywhere, of course. So, I think when we societally think of a reservoir, we imagine water flowing into it from the rivers and the watershed that it's on. San Luis Reservoir is unique in that it's what's referred to as off-stream storage. So virtually all of the water that is put into San Luis Reservoir is pumped into it, and it all comes from Northern California. So it's stored behind Trinity Reservoir, Shasta Reservoir, Oroville Reservoir, and Folsom Reservoir primarily. And that water, when it flows through the system, is captured in the delta. The state water project and the federal Central Valley project have 2 pumping plants near the city of Tracy on the southern end of the delta, and they lift the water there, and it's carried down into San Luis Reservoir. It serves the vast majority of the state of California. About 25 million people get some portion of their water out of San Luis Reservoir, so that's about 2/3 of the state is directly affected by it. It also serves 7 of the nation's top 10 ag-producing counties. So I think commonly when we think of California, we think about technology, we think about tourism, we think about entertainment, but California is actually the #1 ag state in the nation. There are many crops that California grows exclusively that are irrigated with water that's water that's stored in San Luis Reservoir. Canning tomatoes is a great example. And so if you're opening a jar of pasta sauce in Maine, or if you're opening a jar of salsa in Texas, the odds are excellent that you're actually consuming water that was once stored in San Luis Reservoir. So its reach is far beyond just, the 2/3 of Californians that it directly affects. It is, sadly ironic perhaps, that this year San Luis Reservoir was the 2nd lowest it had ever been. And this was after a fairly decent Northern California winter. The only time it's ever been lower, they intentionally took it lower because they were doing construction in the bottom of the reservoir. They had to. But even in the major droughts of 1977, which is still considered the driest year, on record, it has never been this low before. So why was it this low? It certainly wasn't due to a lack of abundance of water. Northern California precipitation, where the water for San Luis Reservoir comes from, was about 115% of average. We saw major reservoirs spilling. Folsom Reservoir spilled over the top. Oroville was full. Shasta was full. And so we had an abundance of water. What impacted San Luis Reservoir so uniquely this year was our inability to capture that water. And it really comes down to regulations that were set in place nearly a decade ago now, intended to try and protect listed species that are native to the delta and its tributaries. Chinook salmon, and more specifically winter run, which is sort of a subspecies of Chinook salmon, are part of the play here. What the managers of winter run are trying to do is hold an abundant amount of water behind the reservoirs, because the more water that's behind the reservoir, the colder that water is. And winter run, they come and they start spawning in the summertime. And they used to be able, before the dams were built and California was developed, those winter runs swam far, far, far up into the Sierras. They can't swim that far up anymore. And so the habitat that they have available to them today is much warmer than what they evolved in. And so this cold water is held behind the reservoirs. The ability to utilize that water and to release it in the summertime and in the fall when we could pump it has been limited because And it comes down to this fundamental disconnect now between how much it rains and how much water we can move to the 2/3 of Californians that are south of the Delta. And now that we're unable to move that water when it's present in the system, we have societies, we have cultures, we have communities, we have industries, we have environments that we have developed throughout the state that all look and feel a certain way because of our ability to move water from north to south, right, and from east to west. If we can't solve this problem about, how do we protect these species in a way that simultaneously still allows us to move water where it's needed most, what does that mean for the future of California? What does it mean for any desire to, expand in Silicon Valley? What does it mean for agriculture? There are 5 million people who live in the Central Valley, right? That's the state of Colorado, who are dependent on an agricultural economy, who are dependent on the functioning operation of these water projects. What are we going to do with them? That's a hard question because there are a lot of pieces to the puzzle. I mean, first off, we all as individuals can use less water. So conservation, of course, is something that we all can do each and every day. It is with few exceptions that there's any Californian who's walked to their sink, flipped on the tap, and water hasn't come out. Now, it has happened, and that's a tragedy in and of itself. What you see, I think, now is a big movement to water reuse and recycling, and that's fantastic because this is water that's already in the system. Urban wastewater is now being treated. We have the technology to treat this wastewater to a point where it can be potable once again. You can put it in a bottle of water, you could set it next to whatever, Dasani or whatever it's called, right? And no one could tell you the difference. So there are a lot of ways to use the water that we have more wisely, and just get more uses out of each drop. So I think fundamental and perhaps most importantly is the need to step back and sort of examine this onion of regulations that we've built for ourselves, take it apart, and begin to assess it. What's working, what isn't working, what can we do better? Because we haven't done that for over a quarter of a century.